aboard Pink Monorail. I'm your pilot, Michelle Valladolid, and next to me is my co-pilot, my husband Noah Valladolid.
Hey everybody.
We're going to continue our look at Manufacturing the Magic, a history of the American theme park. Today we're looking at Coney Island. There are several different tales of how Coney Island got its name. One story says that it was named after the Coney, or bear tribe. Another says it's named after explorer Henry Hudson's right-hand man John Coleman, who was killed by Native Americans. And a third says it's for the Dutch word koning, K-O-N-I-J-N, which means rabbit, as when they got there in 1624, the island was inhabited by thousands of rabbits. In early maps, it's called Nariok, or the islets that combined to eventually form the island were named Pine Island, Pelican Island, and Sedgebank. In 1816, a treatise on place names in New York called it Coney Island after a group of families who lived there. In the first half of the 19th century, a Coney Island Creek ferry took passengers to and from the island. A man named Peter O'Connor swore he named it after an almost identical island in Ireland. At this time, Tammany Hall was sending people down to the island to run prostitution and gambling, as well as fixing elections. In 1829, a crushed shell road was opened, and a hotel, the Coney Island House, opened for business. I'm getting this from PBS.org. Samuel Colt, of Colt 45 fame, installed an observation tower on the island in 1845 to telegraph ship arrivals to New York City. By 1870, gangs ran rampant, drinking and gambling, and visitors were worried and warned to keep an eye on their wallets. Michael Thunderbird Norton ran a rowdy hotel at Norton's Point at the far end of the island. Respectable citizens moved to Brighton Beach and Manhattan Beach, where opulent palaces of hotels were built. Charles Feltman is said to have invented the hot dog at Coney Island in 1867, though it didn't get popular in the rest of the country until the turn of the century. He built a hotel with his hot dog money in 1878. By then, there were 60,000 visitors to Coney Island per day. In 1877, another observation tower, this time a huge steel one, was erected by hotelier Andrew Culver. By some accounts, it was moved there from the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876. James V. Lafferty made history in 1885 by building the Elephantine Colossus, a 31-room building that looked like a giant elephant. There is a model of it in the lobby of Disney's Boardwalk Resort at Walt Disney World in Florida. It was the second of 3 giant elephants built by Lafferty, the first being Elephant Bazaar, aka Lucy the Elephant, in Atlantic City, and followed by the Light of Asia in Cape May. It was 122 feet tall, about twice the size of the Atlantic City elephant Lucy, and a giant howdah was on its back, like in the movie Aladdin where they sit in the little room on the elephant's back with the curtains. That's a howdah. The front legs were a cigar store, Hi Roger, and the back legs hid a circular stairway leading into the body of the elephant. Before the Statue of Liberty, it was the first structure immigrants from overseas saw upon arrival in the United States. Vendors included novelty stalls, a gallery, a grand hall, and a museum where the elephant's left lung would be. The eyes contained telescopes advertised as being able to see Yellowstone Park, Rio de Janeiro, and Paris, France. Too bad about that curvature of the earth. Later, it became a brothel, then stayed vacant for years until it was destroyed by fire in 1896. Luna Park was built on the property, and a trip to the moon was built on that exact spot. Lucy the Elephant still stands in Margate, New Jersey, 5 miles from Atlantic City. She is the oldest roadside attraction in the United States. Now we're going back to The American Amusement Park Industry by Judith Adams. For a few years, Tammany Hall had a boss at Coney Island, John Y. McCain. By 1888, McCain was police chief, town supervisor, head of board of health, and superintendent of Sunday schools. He could lease land for concessions, award contracts, sanction illegal land deals, and reward his unsavory friends. He wore a diamond-encrusted police badge and walked with a gold-handled cane, plus diamond rings, cufflinks, and shirt studs. He was said to have influenced the elections of Grover Cleveland and William Henry Harrison by stuffing the Gravesend and Coney Island ballot boxes. In 1893, he attacked and jailed poll workers sent by the state, and his little fiefdom crumbled. He was sentenced to Sing Sing in 1894. His departure opened up the area for a new creation called the Amusement Park. Back in 1884, Lamarcus Thompson built the world's first actual roller coaster. It had many precursors, called the Switchback Railway, not far from the Elephant Hotel. There were sideshows and horse racing, with 3 big tracks. In 1895, Paul Boynton opened Sea Lion Park. It was the first enclosed permanent amusement park in North America. Boynton was famous for crossing the English Channel in his invention, a rubber safety suit. He traveled across the United States and established an amusement park in Chicago in 1894, which we talked about earlier, the White City. He then purchased the land behind the Elephant Hotel as a permanent location for his 40 sea lions and their shows. The most popular ride was a Shoot the Chutes. That's the one with the boat that goes down the long...
almost straight down.
Almost straight down, that's right. And then bounces like a pebble being thrown across the water. Skips across the water. Boynton would send wild animals down the chutes for publicity, from lions to bears and even baby elephants. The first looping coaster in the USA, the Flip Flap Railway, was also popular. The coaster's creator, Lina Beecher, first put up the coaster in Toledo, Ohio in 1888. It was tested with sandbags and then monkeys. The coaster had a single rail, and rotors rode 2 in a car, tandem, like on the Matterhorn. The coaster often produced whiplash and other injuries due to its circular shape. Later loops are teardrop-shaped. There was also an old mill ride called Cages of Wild Wolves, and a ballroom built in 1899. By 1902, Boynton could not keep up with demand for new attractions. He spent $100,000 on a revamp and purchased Topsy the Elephant, who we're going to hear about later, in 1902. The 1902 season was rainy, and business was bad. Steeplechase Park had opened in 1897, and Sea Lion Park couldn't keep up with the competition. Frederick Thompson and Elmer Skip Dundee obtained a long-term lease on the land and turned it into Luna Park. And that was the end of Sea Lion Park. Meanwhile, George C. Tillieu was operating Steeplechase Park, the funny place. The logo was a manic-looking man's face, with a wide smile showing about 32 front teeth, and hair with wings in the bangs parted in the middle. Tillieu had attended the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, and fell in love with the Ferris wheel. He tried to buy it on the spot. It had already been sold, so he got hold of the Pennsylvania Steel Company, who built the original wheel, and had them build another one for him. This is from PBS.org. He built the Ferris wheel on the Bowery and West 8th Street, near Culver's observation tower. Even though his wheel was smaller than the one at the White City, he billed it as the largest one in the world. He had his sister Catherine sell tickets wearing their mother's diamond necklace, and kept 2 burly men on the sides of the booth to protect the necklace. Tillieu had several rides scattered around Coney Island, but after seeing Sea Life Park, decided to open his own enclosed park on oceanfront property. Since horse racing was the most popular thing going on Coney Island, Tillieu decided to pay homage with the first racing coaster. Tillieu called the ride the Steeplechase Horses. Riders sat similar to Pony Express and Knott's, but 6 of them across. 6 different cars, each holding 2 people, usually a couple of man and woman. Riders went up and down over a stream bed and a series of hurdles all around the outside of the park. Gravity gave heavier riders the advantage. And I have a note here, wacky soapbox racers. Do you remember the wacky soapbox racers?
At Knott's Berry Farm.
At Knott's Berry Farm with the cats.
Mm-hmm.
I actually know someone who worked on that and saw some great construction pictures. But if you were heavier, you won.
You're going to win that race.
You were going to win that race. Now you can do racing rides and have it look as if both sides win, like in Radiator Springs Racers in Cars Land at Disney California Adventure. Till you dressed ride employees as jockeys and started each race with a bugle. That's from the American Amusement Park Industry by Judith Adams. I'm going to quote here. It's a long quote. The only exit led through dim, labyrinthian passages to a brightly lit stage dubbed the Insanatorium. Here the unsuspecting but hesitant pair was eyed by a clown and I'm going to say little person. She says something different. While snickers from a large audience could be heard. Suddenly, a gust of wind whipped the young lady's skirt around her ears while the clown aimed a rod, producing an electric shock between the legs of her bow. As he clutched his wounded parts and the lady tried to reassemble her attire, the crowd's howls increased the couple's humiliation. Their ordeal was far from over, as they still had to endure whacks with slapsticks, more blowholes, and a pile of barrels ominously tottering just above their heads. Stripped of any self-conscious dignity, they finally limped off stage to join the audience and laugh at the next victims. And people now complain when there's a gift shop at the exit.
That's better than getting a cattle prod to the private parts or your skirt getting blown up in the air.
Yeah, especially in the 1800s because you couldn't even show your ankles.
Right. Oh, what a scandal. And of course, a theater full of people that had just had the same thing happen to them sitting there laughing at the next person.
That's beautiful.
That's the original version of Jackass, I suppose.
I think so. In 1902, he got Frederick Thompson and Elmer Skip Dundee to bring A Trip to the Moon to Steeplechase Park from the Buffalo Pan American Exposition. We talked about this in an earlier show. After a year, the pair moved out and used the attraction as the cornerstone of their park, Luna Park. Remember, they bought Sea Lion Park.
Ah, so they moved. So this is the third location for the ride to the moon.
Yes.
Okay.
Steeplechase Park was like a huge funhouse. To enter, you had to traverse the Barrel of Love, a polished wooden spinning barrel. It was called the Barrel of Love because they threw people together. Inside the Pavilion of Fun, they encountered the Earthquake Stairway, the Witchway, and other confusing attractions. The human roulette wheel flung passengers to its perimeter, and the human pool table used spinning discs to confound people trying to cross its surface. They had a human zoo, but you went down a spiral staircase and found yourself in a cage, being offered peanuts and amid monkey talk. In 1907, the park was destroyed by fire. Till you, ever the showman, posted a sign at the entrance. I had troubles yesterday that I have not today. I have troubles today that I had not yesterday. On this site will be erected a bigger, better Steeplechase Park. Admission to the burning ruins, 10 cents.
Yep, always a businessman.
Till you died in 1914, and the park lost some of its pizzazz, but it kept up through the Depression and 2 world wars until closing in 1964, making it the longest-running amusement park in Coney Island. There was talk of naming the Pavilion of Fun to the National Register of Historic Places, but before a ruling could be made, developer Fred C. Trump demolished it against a court order.
Boo!
Boo! Today, all that exists of the park is the parachute jump, which had been there since 1940. Retired naval officer James H. Strong originally built it to train real-life paratroopers. It first appeared at the 1939 New York World's Fair. Trump never built the residential tower he wanted for the site, and in 2001, Keyspan Park, now Maimonides Park, a sports stadium, was built on the site. Steeplechase Park had 25-cent admission and had over 50 attractions on its midway alone. It saw its 20 millionth visitor in 1946. City planner Robert Moses hated amusement parks and Coney Island, saying bathers had less room than in a coffin in 1937. He rezoned the amusement park area for high-rise housing in the 1940s. In 1953, Moses proposed to upgrade the area and close all storefront amusements and attractions except Steeplechase Park. The Insanatorium was closed in 1961 after the assault of a worker there. Not a big surprise.
Yeah, I can imagine people had just had their fill, and somebody that had no idea what they were about to go through was going to fight somebody.
And in 1961, there wasn't a lot of skirt to blow up.
Right.
Public housing projects brought high crime to the area, chasing people away. Trump made a big show of destroying the Pavilion of Fun because the Chamber of Commerce and the city proposed changing the law to preserve it. He sold bricks for people to smash the windows. The Steeplechase horses were sold to a park in Dania Beach, Florida. The El Dorado Carousel went to Japan. Trump leased the site to Norman Kaufman, who opened around 50 different amusements on the site and called it Steeplechase Park, including 3 roller coasters. The city purchased the site from Trump for $4 million. Permission to sell or lease the parkland required permission from the New York State Legislature, guaranteeing Trump would never get his hands on it again. They tried to evict Kaufman and build an actual park, but Kaufman refused to leave until 1981, when they paid him $1 million to buy up his rides. The second of the 3 major parks in Coney Island's heyday was Luna Park, built by Frederick Thompson and Elmer "Skip" Dundee. Riding high on the success of A Trip to the Moon, they pulled the attraction from Steeplechase Park and used it as the cornerstone of their new park, hence the name Luna Park. Where Toulouse specialized in lowbrow and slapstick humor, Luna Park was based on elegant spectacle. They used staff to create fanciful, beautiful towers lined with lights, over 1,000 incandescent lights on the opening arch itself. When it came time for opening night, the park was suddenly and completely illuminated. People thought it was the second coming and panicked. A newspaper claims they overheard one viewer say, "Ah, God, what might the prophet have written in Revelations if only he had first beheld a spectacle like this?" People didn't talk like that even back then. It had exotic architecture, minarets.
The architecture that we wouldn't see in the West. So things from India, things from the Middle East.
Yeah, exactly. The Midway included an Eskimo village, the canals of Venice, a Dutch windmill, a Japanese garden, a trip to the moon, the first ride called 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, elephant shows, disaster shows like Fire and Flames, like the circus act in Dumbo with the burning building, and stunt performers, but no clowns. Recreations of the Johnstown flood of 1889, Galveston flood of 1900, eruption of Mount Vesuvius, and destruction of Pompeii. These predated Universal's earthquake, the big one, by 80 years.
Yeah, not only that, but several of Universal's big disaster things. Backdraft, that subway scene that would get flooded.
That was an earthquake.
Or that was our earthquake. Then the little Mexican village that had the flash flood as well.
And the collapsing bridge.
So yeah, wow, 80 years.
They got more than 4 million visitors a year. To put this in perspective, in 1990, only 4 places got more than 4 million visitors a year: Disney World, Disneyland, Universal Studios Hollywood, and Knott's. One of the things that Luna Park will always be remembered for is the unfortunate demise of Topsy the elephant.
Oh no, not the story of Topsy.
Elephant was born in the wild somewhere in Southeast Asia around 1875 and was smuggled into the United States as a baby. Adam Forepaugh of Forepaugh's Circus bought her and claimed that she was the first baby elephant born in the United States. P.T. Barnum got hold of the elephant poacher who had sold Forepaugh the elephant and forced Forepaugh to publicly recount the claim. He instead claimed that Topsy was the first elephant born outside of a tropical zone. She wasn't. Topsy was named after a character in the then-popular book Uncle Tom's Cabin. Have you ever read Uncle Tom's Cabin? Really sad book. I can imagine why it would get white people off their butts to end slavery. Topsy had a reputation after a life of mistreatment as a bad elephant. In 1902, drunk spectator James Fielding Blount entered the elephant menagerie and began taunting the elephants, offering a bottle of whiskey and burning the delicate tips of their trunks with a cigar. When he burned Topsy, she picked him up, threw him on the ground, and reportedly stomped on his head, killing him.
Good on her.
Yeah. The story grew into her killing 2 workers in Texas. She didn't. It was also said that she killed 12 men in total. She didn't. This action brought many huge crowds to see the killer elephant. 2 months later, Topsy picked up and threw another man, this one trying to poke her behind her ear with a stick. A handler kept him from being killed. Forepaugh decided to sell Topsy. Paul Boynton from Sea Lion Park Paul Boynton bought Topsy and brought her to Sea Lion Park. When the park was sold to Frederick Thompson and Skip Dundee, Topsy was put to work as penance for her crimes by hauling wood and set pieces from A Trip to the Moon's old location at Steeplechase Park to its new home at Luna Park. Handler William Alt came with as part of the package, and when she balked at moving the airship Luna from the attraction, Alt stabbed her with a pitchfork.
Oh, no.
He was stopped by police, and in protest, Alt let Topsy roam free in the streets, leading to Alt's arrest. A few months later, a drunken Alt attempted to ride Topsy into the police station. Alt was fired. Without Alt, Topsy's owners said they could no longer control her, so they tried to sell her. They couldn't even give her away for free. No circus or zoo would take her. On December 13, 1902, they announced that Topsy would be executed for her crimes in a public spectacle by electrocution. Apocryphal stories abound of how Thomas Edison killed an elephant. They are simply not true. The so-called War of the Currents between AC and DC had ended a decade before. Edison's name was on the company that supplied the electricity, but he had sold all of his shares to General Electric years before. His name was on the film of Topsy being electrocuted, but he was never at Luna Park. 1,000 or so films from Coney Island bore his name, but they were mostly filmed by Edwin S. Porter or Jacob Blair Smith. You can see the film, called Electrocuting an Elephant, online or at the Coney Island Museum. On January 1st, 1903, Thompson and Dundee announced plans to hang the elephant and charge 25 cents a head to view the hanging. The ASPCA stepped in and forbade the hanging, but agreed to poisoning, electrocution, and strangling with rope and a winch, but they could not charge admission. The press, however, was invited, and people paid various sums of money to watch the execution from nearby rooftops. About 100 people were allowed in free to watch. The local power company, Edison Electric Illuminating Company of Brooklyn, strung power lines 9 blocks to the site. Topsy was led out of her pen, but didn't make it to the execution site. She stopped and refused to budge partway. They decided to bring the execution to her and put copper-lined sandals on her front right and back left feet, attached to wires. They fed her the poisoned carrots, but she wouldn't eat enough for the poison to work. Then they electrocuted her. One of the handlers got burned in the process. Her feet began smoking and she fell down dead without protest. She was then strangled for 10 minutes for good measure. My ex-husband and good friend Jim Hill watched a documentary about Topsy in the early 90s. Jim's brother Pete came home from work one winter night and found Jim sitting on the living room floor making a papier-mâché elephant. Topsy never had a last Christmas, Jim explained. So they covered Topsy with indoor Christmas lights, and Topsy had a Merry Christmas. When Jim and I were planning to marry, Pete said he wouldn't have room for Topsy in his new pad, and Jim couldn't take her down to Florida with him, so it was decided to give Topsy a funeral in a pyre at the family campground in Vermont. Jim, by the way, used highly flammable paint on Topsy, so when he put her on the fire...
Oh, poor Topsy. Well, she's at peace now.
And that is the story of Topsy the elephant.
God bless Topsy. And boo on people that are mean to elephants.
That's right. Luna Park itself was highly profitable until 1907, when Skip Dundee died and Frederick Thompson became a raging alcoholic. Its lease was cancelled in 1912. The Luna Amusement Company owned the park from 1912 to 1939. During the Great Depression, creditors foreclosed on the park twice. The park was leased to a syndicate in 1940 and continued to operate until 1944. An infant incubator attraction was popular. We discussed those earlier.
Mm-hmm. I heard that the guy that claimed to be a doctor in order to have those incubators there and to charge admission to see the little babies, but he wasn't actually a doctor.
What?
Yeah. The person that started that whole thing, he had bought them, and they said there was a big protest, and they said, well, you can't do that because you're charging people to see these sickly little babies that normally would die. And he says, I'm a doctor, and these incubators are keeping them alive, and the money that we raise help to maintain this equipment and to raise just the public sentiment that no, there's nothing wrong with these children, they were just born prematurely, and incubators keep them alive.
80% of them survived.
Yeah. But the entire thing was that they didn't push back because they said, well, he is a doctor. He claims to be a doctor, so he must be saying the right things. But it turned out he wasn't actually a doctor.
Unlike Steeplechase Park, which was dry, they sold alcohol in the German Village section of the park later on in the park's history.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, these parks had some limited lands. The concession to sell alcohol was stymied by Lou Wagner and George M. Foley, who sued to stop alcohol and tobacco sales in the park. 142,000 people showed up on July 4th, 1903. New York Mayor George B. McClellan Jr. in 1909 tried to stop the park from performing its spectacular pageants on Sundays. The New York Supreme Court shot him down. Additions included a quote-unquote Oriental village with Arab, Egyptian, and Turkish villagers, and a human zoo of little people. There were scenic railways, aka roller coasters, toboggans, a Mount Everest attraction. Now, I'm not sure if this was a ride like Everest at Disney, or if it was a cyclorama or what it was. Just that there was a Mount Everest attraction. If anyone has any information, please let me know. They also had burro rides. They had a simulated World War I battlefield, a monkey orchestra, a new boardwalk opened on Coney Island, the Regalman Boardwalk, which brought more people, then a Samoan village, an Egyptian village, and a Wild West show. Throughout the years, sections of the park burned down and were rebuilt. In 1930, they installed a cyclorama depicting Richard E. Byrd's Antarctic base. During the Great Depression, they lowered ride prices and held free shows. The beer garden was finally added in 1933 that we discussed in the German pavilion.
Okay.
In 1944, fire took out half the park. In 1946, the remains of the park were sold to a company that planned to raise the inside and build housing for war veterans. During demolition, the remains of the park suffered another fire. The rides along Surf Avenue were all that remained. Ballpark Movies, which was an outdoor movie place, drive-in theater type outdoor movies, occupied the land in 1950. They acquired the land in 1950, and later that year, our old pal Fred Trump showed up and bought half the property from them. He bought the rest of it in 1953. Trump had trouble securing funding for the buildings he wanted to build because, surprise, surprise, federal officials indicted Trump on charges of profiteering in connection with a separate development. 20 years later, he and his son Donald would get in trouble for refusing to rent to people of color. The New York City Housing Authority took over the site. Most of it became a housing cooperative, but a small part of it became a shopping center. Luna Park was called the Heart of Coney Island. There's a website called The Heart of Coney Island that I used in research that is meticulously detailed over who owned what and what was where all over Coney Island. The last of the three great parks of Coney Island's heyday was the short-lived Dreamland, operating from 1904 to 1911.
Still lasted longer than the Confederacy.
It did. It included a human zoo, several scenic railways, a shoot-the-chutes ride, and a replica of Venice. Which is funny, it had a replica of Venice in Italy. When Dreamland burned down, as we learned last episode, in Venice Beach, they built a replica of Dreamland.
It's very meta.
It is. It aimed to do everything Luna Park did, but bigger and brighter. The park operated between May and September of each year and was built by former State Senator William H. Reynolds. In 1911, a worker upset a bucket of hot pitch and burned the whole park down.
Oh, no.
The New York Aquarium was eventually built upon the site. Dreamland was supposed to be an elegant counterpart to raucous Steeplechase and exotic Luna Park. It was painted entirely white. Sound familiar? Luna Park had 250,000 lights. Dreamland had 1 million. Because it was on the water, it had a pier and a private beach and bathhouse. Their fire show was bigger, employing what they claimed was 4,000 performers. It was 10 cents to get in on weekdays, 15 cents on weekends, and up to 25 cents for individual rides. And now we're seeing different pricing for weekends and weekdays and busy days and such at Disneyland and Walt Disney World.
I think I remember in that period, if the inflation is correct, that's like $20 a ride.
Well, that's about what it costs to ride Rise of the Resistance. About $20. So things haven't changed that much. The Creation Show from the 1904 St. Louis Exposition expedition ended up here. There was a recreation of a Roman hippodrome, a submarine ride, a Hell's Gate ride, and a Japanese theater. In 1906, they quickly added an exhibition of the earthquake and fire in San Francisco. It hosted vaudeville shows later that year, religious-themed morality shows, but struggled to attract as many visitors as Luna Park. They offered free admission but still charged for the rides. They revamped the park and doubled the size of the dance hall, added scenic railways, a deep-sea divers attraction, and a Filipino village. Blue laws were enacted which were brought forth because of the free circus on Sundays and the Filipino villagers showing their legs.
Scandalous.
For their last season, they opened an alligator and crocodile farm, a Bornean village, and a ride called A Trip to the North Pole. The buildings were painted white and red, new flat rides were added, the ballroom moved, a skating rink added, and the bathhouse doubled in size. There were 30 new shows, including a wild animal show and a show of human curiosities.
Not quite a human, so probably a sideshow type attraction.
Yeah, ew. The fire that destroyed it all was the first double 9 alarm fire a New York Fire Department had ever fought in Brooklyn. Incubator babies were saved, but 60 animals were killed, screaming in their cages as they burned alive. A lion escaped and was shot as he climbed a roller coaster. It's said that his mane was on fire.
Oh, poor guy.
They were not kind to animals back in the day. 350,000 people showed up to see the ruins. Dreamland's owners staged several shows for them. Exhibitors charged people to see destroyed rides and burnt animal carcasses. The New York State Legislature banned incubator exhibits from amusement parks. Reynolds tried selling the property to New York for a park. They decided to take it via condemning it. The site went through 8 years of condemnation and legal battles, went through several owners, then became a parking lot. Plans for the New York Aquarium were announced in 1943, but didn't open until 1957. It is open there now. There were many concessions or independent attractions in Coney Island, including the second streets of Cairo. There were roller coasters and dark rides. In my research for my class 20 years ago, I came across a story of a mine-themed dark ride at Coney Island. I, for the life of me, cannot find that story now, so I have no idea if it's true. The owner of the mine ride contacted Walt Disney, who sent an artist to Coney Island to paint Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on the front wall of the dark ride. For this, he paid Disney $200. If anyone knows anything about this, please let me know. Oh, I hope it's true.
That would be the very first Walt Disney dark ride.
It would.
And it was a Snow White one because that was the movie at the time and it was very popular.
Yes, 1939. One of my favorite stories when I taught the original Manufacturing the Magic class back about 20 years ago was about Nathan's hot dogs. Now, around the turn of the century, hot dogs had become more popular. There were restaurants serving hot dogs, and they were going for about 10 cents each. Nathan's started out and started serving hot dogs at 5 cents each, and no one would buy them. They were a little surprised, but people were afraid there were things like rats in the hot dogs and such.
Yeah, there were hot dogs made of horse meat or something, and people were suspicious. Fair enough.
So what Nathan did was he hired actors who dress as doctors and nurses and sit at the hot dog stand eating hot dogs. And it worked. People came, and Nathan's became the famous hot dog that they are now. And every year at Coney Island, they hold a hot dog eating competition.
And that's on the 4th of July, I think.
Yes.
It's a national institution. God bless Nathan's.
God bless Nathan's. The Wonder Wheel was built in 1920. It has sliding cars like the purple and orange cars on the picture pal around at Disney California Adventure, or as I call it, no thank you.
Call it Mickey's Fun Wheel.
I call those cars no thank you. I went on them one time, and Jim's arm still has the marks on them. It is the centerpiece of Dino's Wonder Wheel amusement park. It was made a city landmark in 1989. The B&B Carousel is the oldest operating carousel in Coney Island. It was near the entrance to the original Luna Park, but has been moved several times. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2016. The Coney Island Cyclone was built in 1927. It is an irreplaceable Woody. It is owned by the City of New York, was made a city landmark in 1988, and was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1991. The steel Thunderbolt opened in June 2014 and sits where the wooden Thunderbolt used to stand. Astroland Amusement Park opened from 1962 to 2008, and Luna Park opened on the same spot of land in 2010. A second Dreamland briefly operated at that site in 2009. These amusement parks are charmless, pale shadows of the three great parks, about as well themed as a parking lot. It's just a bunch of unthemed rides, no architecture, no pageantry, no spectacle. Now we have theme parks for that. We hope you enjoyed this look at Coney Island and learned how its early parks influenced today's theme parks. Next time, we'll buy some fresh eggs and take a tour of a real working movie studio, Universal Studios Hollywood.
Oh, excellent. That was wonderful, Shelly. Those were some real historic theme parks, but more than history. They shaped everything that would come in the 20th century and the 21st century.
Absolutely.
Wow. All right, so if people want to find out more about your writing, where can they find you, Shelly?
They can find me at micechat.com, the happiest place in cyberspace, and at jimhillmedia.com.
Now, if somebody does have some articles they want to link you to, like specifically if we can find the proof on that Snow White dark ride that they had, or if they would just like to support this podcast, where can they support us?
Go to patreon.com/fab. That's F-A-B, fab.
If you want to find out more about my articles, I write mostly on video games, but every now and then I do write about Disney and animation. You can just do a Google search for the Street Writer Podcast, so it'll point you to my blog. Or if you're on YouTube, you can also just do a quick YouTube search for the Street Writer Podcast, and you'll find a few of the things I've recorded there as well. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this tour, and we'll see you again soon on the Pink Monorail. A special shout out to our sponsor, Circa 1955. Nicole is the founder of Luxillume, a small company that makes candles, wax melts, and room sprays. She creates scents that capture the season, nature, or wonderful memories. She also takes commissions for larger orders, such as weddings or company gifts. It turns out that Nicole is also a huge Disney fan and has a line called Circa 1955. She creates scents inspired by all things Disney. This includes the parks, attractions, treats, and films. She creates each formula and batch of candles herself. For every one scent she's released, she's probably made over 200 trials just to get the smell right. Don't take my word for it. Go to circa1955.com, order a candle, and use promo code PINK15. That's PINK15 to get 15% off your purchase. Support a small company that also gives back to the community. You're going to love it. Another shout out to Jim Hill for hosting Pink Monorail on his podcast network. The Jim Hill Podcast Network also includes Looking at Lucasfilm, The Disney Dish, I Want That, and Fine Tuning. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review for each podcast. Have a great day.